What if the man sweeping the floors on your campus was actually one of the greatest minds of our time? What if the person you ignored every day once stood at the front of the lecture hall, shaping the very theories you now study? This is The Forgotten Genius, a powerful fictional story that will challenge the way you see people, institutions, and even yourself. It's a story about hidden brilliance, quiet resilience, and the legacy we leave behind, not through fame but through truth. If you're looking for a story that inspires, teaches, and stays with you long after the last word, you're in the right place. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more thought-provoking stories like this one. And we'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below letting us know what this story made you feel, or which part resonated most with you. Now settle in, open your heart, and listen closely. Because sometimes, the greatest geniuses are the ones no one ever sees coming. In the quiet corners of a prestigious Arizona university, a janitor named Zeke sweeps hallways and empties trash bins while students and professors pass him by, never guessing the truth about who he really is. Mocked, overlooked, and dismissed, Zeke keeps his brilliance hidden, until one curious student stumbles upon his name in a textbook and uncovers a stunning secret. The janitor is a former professor and the mind behind theories that once reshaped his field. What follows is a powerful story of rediscovery, truth, and quiet rebellion, as Zeke's past collides with the present, and a growing circle of students begins to see the world, and their own potential, through new eyes. The Forgotten Genius is a moving tale about dignity, erasure, and the freedom to live life on your own terms. A reminder that wisdom doesn't always wear a title, and sometimes the most important teachers are the ones no one sees coming. Disclaimer: The Forgotten Genius is a work of fiction. All characters, events, and institutions portrayed in this story are entirely imaginary and are not intended to represent real individuals or actual situations. Any similarities to real people, living or deceased, are purely coincidental. This story is created solely for the purpose of providing moral lessons, motivation, inspiration, and educational insight. It is not intended to criticize, depict, or reflect any specific person, group, or organization. Viewer discretion is advised, and we encourage audiences to engage with the story thoughtfully and interpret its messages in a spirit of learning and reflection. The sun had barely risen over Tempe, Arizona, but the desert heat already pressed gently against the sandstone buildings of the university. Morning dew clung stubbornly to shaded grass patches while the rest of the campus prepared to bake under the relentless sky. Students trudged sleepily to their early classes, earbuds in, iced coffees in hand, eyes on their phones. The university hummed to life in a well-rehearsed rhythm. Ezekiel Thomas was already halfway through his rounds. Dressed in a navy blue custodial uniform and worn boots, he moved through the corridors of the humanities building like a shadow, present but unnoticed. His mop glided smoothly over the floor tiles, swaying in time with his steps. A faded key ring clinked softly at his belt. His work cart rolled beside him, neatly organized, disinfectant bottles, cloths folded with care, a broom propped up like a companion. The students called him Zeke, though most rarely called him anything at all. They brushed past him in hallways, laughing, arguing, or scrolling through social media. Professors gave him small nods or, more often, walked by without acknowledgement. Occasionally someone would grumble if the floor was still wet, or if a trash bin hadn't been emptied fast enough. Zeke said little. He listened. He observed. He swept. And always he thought. In the corners of his mind, old theories stirred like ancient scrolls being slowly unrolled. Equations danced beside words of Baldwin and Dubois. He recalled phrases from papers he had written, ideas he had shaped. But those belonged to another lifetime. Now he found solace in silence, in the simple rhythm of routine, and in the low hum of voices echoing through the academic halls. Every morning he arrived before the first lecture. By the time most students had rubbed the sleep from their eyes, he had already cleaned 4 floors and restocked supplies. He took his lunch alone under the shade of a Palo Verde tree near the back of the campus. The janitor's closet, small, humid, and cluttered, was his only office now. Few people noticed that Zeke never rushed, that his eyes, though kind, carried a quiet sharpness, that he sometimes paused in the middle of mopping to read a discarded page from a philosophy paper, his lips forming silent corrections. On this particular morning, Leah Kim was among the few who passed him and nodded politely. She was rushing to her Philosophy 203 class, Ethics and the Human Condition, her backpack half-zipped and earbuds tangled around her wrist. She barely registered him, save for the faint trace of pine cleaner and the squeak of the mop. Zeke watched her go, then turned back to his work, humming a low tune under his breath. The corridor filled briefly with music from a nearby classroom. The voices of young thinkers carried down the hall. And Ezekiel Thomas, once hailed as a visionary scholar, continued to mop the floors where his name had once been spoken with reverence. But now no one spoke it. At least not yet. The past was buried beneath layers of time and dust. And Zeke? He had no intention of digging it up. Not unless someone else did first. Leah Kim sat hunched over a corner table in the third floor of the university library, her laptop open but untouched. Piles of books surrounded her like a miniature fortress. Texts on philosophy, ethics, critical theory, and socio-political dynamics. A half-empty bottle of water stood beside her notes, and her phone buzzed occasionally with group chat messages she ignored. Her assignment was simple in theory: write a paper on a lesser-known philosopher whose ideas challenged mainstream thought. But after combing through title after title, she had yet to find a subject that truly intrigued her. Everything felt recycled, like sand slipping through fingers. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the wide windows. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as other students trickled out, their footsteps echoing across the quiet marble floor. Leah remained, flipping impatiently through a thick anthology of post-structuralist essays. That was when she saw it. Cognitive Dissonance in Marginalized Cultures: An Analysis of Identity and Performance in Institutional Spaces, by Dr. Ezekiel Thomas. The name caught her eye immediately, not because she recognized it from academia but because she had heard it somewhere else. Ezekiel Thomas. The janitor. Zeke. She blinked, staring at the page. Her mind scrambled to make sense of it. Could it be a coincidence? Ezekiel wasn't the most common name, but it wasn't unheard of either. Still, the last name. The first initial. The full spelling. It matched. Her fingers skimmed across the lines of the article. The language was dense, but the argument was lucid and powerful. Dr. Thomas examined how individuals from marginalized communities are forced to perform constructed identities in institutions of power, how they internalize expectations, code switch, suppress, adapt, and reshape themselves just to survive, all while navigating the constant friction between authenticity and acceptance. It was masterful. Both. Decades ahead of its time. Leah read through the essay again, this time slower, absorbing the layered insights. Whoever this man was, he had to be someone important. Someone who mattered in the academic world. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard as she searched the university's archives. The results were sparse but telling. A handful of published papers from the late 1990s and early 2000s, all from the same author. One keynote speech from a defunct conference. A mention in a now-retired journal of radical philosophy. Then the trail vanished abruptly, like a candle snuffed out mid-glow. No retirement notice. No obituary. No controversy. Just silence. She typed his name again, this time in a wider search across academic databases. She found a lecture he gave at Columbia. Another paper published through the University of Chicago. Every piece carried the same tone: fiercely intelligent, deeply introspective, and unafraid to challenge the system. But why had he stopped? And more pressingly, could he really be the same man who mopped the halls of the humanities building every morning? It seemed impossible. Yet the coincidence felt too perfect. Leah shut her laptop and stared out the library window. Outside, the campus lights flickered to life one by one, painting the trees in soft amber. A janitor pushed a trash bin across the quad below. For a moment she imagined it was him. Ezekiel. Moving through the world like a ghost no one saw. A genius hiding in plain sight. She suddenly remembered a moment from 2 weeks ago. She had dropped a book on the floor outside her lecture hall. Zeke had picked it up before she could reach for it. He glanced at the cover, The Ethics of Self in Black Thought, and said softly, "Good book. But skip chapter 5. It borrows without giving credit." She had assumed it was just a comment from someone who liked to read. She hadn't thought twice about it. But now, Leah stood up, heart racing, and shoved the anthology into her bag. She descended the library steps 2 at a time, her boots echoing on the stone. The campus was quieter now, and she wasn't sure where to go. She didn't know if she was chasing a ghost or the truth. But something told her she had just stumbled on a secret. One that could rewrite everything. Not just about him, but about herself. The next morning, Leah arrived on campus early, earlier than she had since orientation. The sky was still a dull lavender, and a thin mist hovered low over the quad as she walked briskly toward the humanities building. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, only that she had to see him. The halls were empty, silent except for the soft hum of overhead lights. She moved with purpose past locked lecture rooms and department offices, down the wide corridor that led to the janitor's supply room. A small, unassuming door beside the stairwell bore no nameplate, only a smudge where one had once been. She stood in front of it for a moment, unsure of whether to knock. Then it opened. Ezekiel stood in the doorway, holding a folded mop handle in one hand and a cup of black coffee in the other. His brow furrowed slightly as he looked at her, then softened. "Miss Kim," he said, his voice steady and calm. "You're up early." "I wanted to talk to you," Leah said, trying to keep her tone neutral. "Do you have a minute?" Zeke stepped aside and motioned her in with a quiet nod. The janitor's closet was smaller than she expected, cluttered but organized. Shelves were lined with cleaning supplies, rags, and gallon-sized containers. In the corner, a small stool sat beside a crate repurposed as a table, stacked with books. Old books. Not pulp novels or manuals, texts on phenomenology, cultural criticism, and social theory. Some were marked with handwritten notes in the margins. "You've been digging," he said, sitting on the stool and sipping his coffee. Leah hesitated. "I found your name in a textbook. An essay you wrote years ago. It was brilliant." I didn't know." "Most don't," Zeke replied. "Not anymore." She waited for him to elaborate, but he didn't. Instead, he reached into a cardboard box beneath the stool and pulled out a battered paperback. He flipped through it slowly, the pages worn from years of handling. "I used to think writing ideas down would make them permanent," he said. "But permanence is an illusion. Even theories fade. People forget the names attached to them. Institutions move on." Leah took a cautious step forward. "But you're still here. You never really left." He gave her a sidelong glance. "Depends on what you mean by left. I left the stage, the lectures, the citations. But I stayed close. Not for recognition. Just to listen. To be where minds are still forming." "But why walk away?" she asked, more softly now. "You could have kept teaching. Publishing. You could have." Zeke held up a hand. "Do you know what it's like to be praised for your mind but not trusted with power? To be quoted but ignored? I spent years trying to change a system that smiles while sharpening its teeth. They let me speak as long as I didn't speak too loudly." He leaned back against the shelves, eyes distant. "One day, I realized I didn't want to fight for a seat at a table that was never built for me. So I stepped away." Leah didn't speak. The silence between them was thick with unspoken stories, with years of pain folded neatly beneath layers of quiet dignity. "Do you regret it?" she asked finally. Zeke studied her for a long moment. "No," he said. "Regret is for roads that lead nowhere. Mine brought me here. I still get to see young minds catch fire. I still get to be part of it, just from the shadows." He paused, then gave a faint smile. "And every once in a while, someone like you walks through the fog." Leah swallowed hard. Her chest felt tight, not from fear but from awe. She looked again at the books, the quiet sanctuary he had built within these walls. "Would you ever teach again?" she asked. "I never stopped," he said, eyes steady on hers. "I just changed classrooms." Leah nodded slowly. She didn't know what she would do with this moment yet, whether she would tell someone, write something, or simply carry it with her, but she knew it mattered. It was more than a discovery. It was a gift. Outside the closet, the hallway began to stir. The building was waking up. Zeke stood, coffee in hand, mop balanced easily against his shoulder. "Walk with me," he said. And together they stepped out into the morning light, a forgotten genius and a student who now saw the world just a little differently. The weeks that followed passed quietly, but for Leah Kim, nothing felt the same. Every time she stepped into the humanities building, she was acutely aware of his presence. She no longer saw Zeke as the janitor who moved through campus like background music. Now he was something else, someone who carried wisdom like a lantern, careful not to let it blind the eyes of those unready to see. They began to meet in small, unplanned intervals. Sometimes it was 5 minutes before class, sitting under the shaded bench behind the language hall, sipping tea from paper cups. Other times, it was an hour after sundown, tucked away in a forgotten corner of the campus library, leafing through obscure texts. Zeke never lectured. He never quoted himself. He asked questions, offered nudges, and let silence do most of the teaching. "Why do we separate intellect from labor?" he once asked her, eyes fixed on the mop handle he held. Leah had no answer. She carried that question with her for days. He spoke in stories, metaphors, and fragments. About growing up in the rural South, where books were his refuge and broomsticks his inheritance. About the academic years, his rise, the acclaim, the endless conferences that left him more exhausted than proud. and about the quiet erosion of belief in an institution that valued credentials more than truth. Some of the most brilliant people I've met, he told her one evening, never had degrees. They had scars, stories, and a clarity you don't learn in classrooms. His presence became her secret sanctuary. Outside those moments, life moved on. The professor still lectured. The students still crammed for midterms and spilled coffee on rental textbooks. No one seemed to notice Leah's growing collection of notes, scraps of Zeke's wisdom scribbled between lines of her official coursework. But change has a way of rippling. In one of her classes, a professor mentioned a theory of dissonance in identity performance, citing a long-dead French thinker. Leah raised her hand respectfully and mentioned Dr. Ezekiel Thomas's work on similar concepts, rooted in lived experience. The room went silent. The professor hesitated. "Dr. Thomas?" he asked. "I don't recall the name." "He wrote essays in the early 2000s, Leah replied, on marginalized identities in institutional settings. His work predates a lot of what's considered foundational today. The professor looked mildly annoyed but nodded. "Interesting. I'll look into it." Later that afternoon, Leah felt a tap on her shoulder. Another student, Jamal, a quiet senior majoring in sociology, asked where he could find Dr. Thomas's writings. She showed him the textbook. By the next week, 2 more students had printed copies of the essay she had found in the library. The whispers had begun. No one connected it to the janitor. Not yet. But ideas have fingerprints. And once they begin to circulate, they leave trails. One evening, Leah brought Zeke a printed version of one of his old essays, formatted cleanly, bound with care, his name bold at the top. She slid it across the crate that served as his desk in the closet. He picked it up, eyes scanning the pages. "You made this look fancy," he said, smiling faintly. "It's yours," she replied. "It deserves to be seen." He nodded slowly. "Just be careful. Academia has a way of taking what it wants and leaving the rest behind." "I know," she said, "but I think it's time they remembered who wrote this." He looked at her for a long time as if weighing something deeper than her words. Then he stood and opened a nearby drawer. From within it, he pulled out a leather-bound notebook, its cover frayed from years of use. "Maybe," he said quietly, "it's time I wrote a little more." Leah watched him open the first page. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting gold through the window slats. The world spun on, unaware that within a janitor's closet, a lost voice had begun to echo once more. It started with a seminar flyer pinned outside the Department of Philosophy office. Reconsidering identity and power in institutional thought, revisiting the lost works of Dr. Ezekiel Thomas. Presented by Leah Kim. Guest contributor, Anonymous. It was a student-led presentation, part of an undergraduate colloquium open to all departments. Normally these events drew small crowds, fellow students, maybe a curious professor or two. But this flyer sparked quiet interest. Faculty remembered the name. Barely. Some vaguely recalled a promising black scholar from years past, someone with big ideas and a confrontational tone. Someone who left abruptly without fanfare. Others dismissed the name as a relic, a ghost of an academic who failed to play the game. But curiosity is a stubborn force. By the time the seminar day arrived, the small lecture hall was nearly full. Leah stood at the front of the room, her hand steady despite the nerves threading through her spine. On the screen behind her were slides filled with excerpts, annotations, and reconstructed quotes from Zeke's essays. She began not with theory but with a story. She spoke of the quiet genius, the erased names, the voices lost to institutional memory. She explained how she had discovered Dr. Thomas through a single essay buried in a forgotten text. She wove his arguments into current issues: racial bias in education, identity fatigue, the commodification of activism. She showed how his words, written decades earlier, spoke directly to the world now. Her audience leaned in. Then came the questions. A professor in the back row adjusted his glasses and asked, "This is compelling, but how do you know the author intended these interpretations? Without direct commentary, you could be projecting modern readings onto an incomplete archive." Leah held his gaze. "I've spoken with him." A ripple passed through the room. "Excuse me?" the professor asked. "I've been meeting with Dr. Ezekiel Thomas," she said. "He works in the humanities building. You know him as Zeke, the janitor." Murmurs erupted. Some faces went pale. Others went red. The idea didn't register. It couldn't be true. "I understand the shock," Leah continued. "But it's not impossible. It's not even rare. How many great minds have we dismissed because they didn't fit the mold? How many voices have we buried because they chose survival over applause? Another hand rose. A younger lecturer in sociology. If this is true, she said slowly, then the university has a debt it hasn't acknowledged. Leah nodded. Not just this university. All of us. Every student, every scholar, every system that forgets where its knowledge comes from. The room fell into an uneasy quiet. A few professors exchanged glances, whispering behind clipped hands. Others stared ahead, haunted by the thought that someone they passed daily might carry more brilliance than the degrees on their walls. Afterward, Leah packed up her notes, unsure what the fallout would be. She didn't have to wait long. That afternoon, Zeke was summoned to a faculty meeting. It was the first time in over 20 years that his name had appeared on any departmental agenda. He walked into the room without fanfare, without bitterness. His uniform still bore the faint scent of floor polish. His boots still carried dust from the morning rounds. The faculty chair cleared his throat awkwardly. Mr. Thomas. Dr. Thomas, corrected the sociology lecturer from earlier. Zeke raised a hand. Zeke is fine. He stood there, unmoving, calm as ever. We, some of us, were unaware of your prior academic standing, the chair continued. We'd like to better understand the circumstances of your departure and your current status. Zeke looked around the room. These were the same kinds of faces he had once addressed in conference halls. The same expressions, some curious, some skeptical, some masked with professional courtesy. I left because I was tired of asking for permission to be heard, he said. No one spoke. I'm not here to reclaim a title, he added. I'm here because knowledge is never owned. It only passes through us. And I'm still learning just like you. The silence deepened. Then, from the corner of the room, the sociology lecturer spoke again. Would you be willing to guest lecture? On your terms. No titles. No conditions. Zeke considered it. He nodded. On one condition, he said. I don't want a podium. I want a circle. Confused looks spread across the table. A circle of chairs, he clarified. No one above. No one below. There were no objections. Later that week, students gathered in a circle on the library lawn. No one introduced him. He simply began speaking. About thought. About the cost of silence. About the freedom that comes when you have nothing to prove and everything to give. No microphone. No lecture hall. Just voices. Just minds. And for the first time in years, Dr. Ezekiel Thomas spoke not from the margins, but from the center of a circle. The words spread slowly like ink bleeding through paper. At first, it was just a handful of students who came to the lawn. They brought notebooks and sat cross-legged in the grass, unsure of what to expect from the soft-spoken janitor now teaching without a title. There were no syllabi, no lectures, no PowerPoint slides. Only a circle. And Zeke, seated among them, offering questions that burrowed into their bones. What does it mean to think freely in a place that trains you to conform? He asked one morning. No one answered at first. Then Leah responded, and the others followed, their voices halting at first, then firming with each exchange. Zeke didn't guide them so much as he excavated something already buried deep within. Their unspoken doubts, their raw convictions, the ideas they had been too afraid to share in formal classrooms. Each session built on the last, weaving a quiet revolution of thought. By the third week, the circle doubled in size, then tripled. Soon, students from engineering, medicine, art, even athletics began to show up. Some came after hearing stories about a mysterious thinker on the lawn. Others came because they had nothing to lose and everything to feel. Zeke never called roll, never asked names, never needed to. What he offered couldn't be graded. One afternoon, a student named Danny, a psychology major known for sitting in the back of every class, spoke about feeling invisible, about how every theory she studied left out voices that looked and sounded like hers. Zeke listened, then responded with a single line that stayed with her for weeks. Invisibility is the system's way of protecting its illusions. The next day, Danny showed up with a printed zine of her own writing, stapled at the corners, raw and furious and real. She passed it around the circle without a word. That was how the ripple began. Soon, others brought their work, poetry, essays, sketches, diagrams, songs. They called them offerings. There was no judgment, only exchange. Someone started a digital archive. Another student began recording the sessions with Zeke's blessing, uploading short clips anonymously under the tag The Lawn Circle. They weren't viral, but they resonated. Quietly, steadily. And then the press caught wind. A local journalist, intrigued by murmurs on campus, attended a session undercover. Days later, an article appeared in the Arizona Mirror titled, The Janitor Who Teaches, Uncovering the Quiet Genius of Ezekiel Thomas. The story was careful, respectful. It mentioned his past academic life, his published works, his decision to retreat from the spotlight, and how his classroom had become a patch of grass beneath the open sky. The university was forced to respond. Suddenly, the same administration that once overlooked him began reaching out with offers. A visiting lecturer position, honorary acknowledgments, archived recognitions. Zeke declined them all. "I didn't ask to be remembered," he told Leah. "I just wanted them to remember what matters." Leah nodded. She understood now. His mission wasn't about legacy. It was about presence, about truth without decoration. Still, not everyone responded with reverence. Some faculty members called it unorthodox, undisciplined, a disruption of academic rigor. They feared the ripple, feared what it said about them. But Zeke never flinched. He had faced sharper resistance before, and he had chosen peace over pride. Now, in the autumn of his life, he stood with patience, letting the truth do its slow, unshakable work. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the campus bell tower, Zeke sat with Leah on a bench, watching students walk by with headphones, books, dreams. The campus buzzed like it always had, but now, somewhere in its bloodstream, a quiet truth was pulsing. "You ever think about leaving again?" Leah asked him. He chuckled softly. "No, I've done my wandering." He reached into his worn satchel and pulled out a stack of folded papers. Fresh essays, still handwritten, still messy. "I've been writing again," he said. "Nothing fancy. Just thoughts." Leah smiled. "Maybe you'll publish again." "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe I'll just give them away. Like seeds." He looked at her, his eyes warm with something deeper than pride, something like hope. "This place may not change overnight," he said. "But the right minds in the right moments, they can build a fire big enough to see by." Leah sat in the quiet, watching him tuck the papers away. She knew he had never needed a classroom to teach. And now neither did she. The circle was still growing. And the genius that once hid in the shadows now lived, fully present, in the open air. Winter came slowly to Arizona, wrapping the campus in a gentler kind of silence. The buzz of the semester dimmed, replaced by the rustle of dry leaves skittering across sandstone walkways. But even as students packed bags for winter break and faculty closed their office doors, the lawn remained a gathering place. The circle never stopped. Sometimes there were only 5 students. Sometimes 20. On rare days, it grew to over 50, folding out beyond its usual boundaries, each person bringing an offering of voice, perspective, or simply presence. The space had no structure, no hierarchy, and yet it held more meaning than any classroom on campus. And always Zeke was there. Until one day he wasn't. It happened quietly. No announcement. No goodbye. One morning, the custodial closet was locked, the cart untouched. The bench where Zeke usually sat with his thermos sat empty, leaves gathering where his boots once rested. Whispers spread quickly. Had he left? Retired? Fallen ill? Leah checked every hallway, every corner of campus. She asked the grounds crew. No one knew for sure. One said they'd heard he moved back south. Another said he had mentioned visiting an old friend in New Mexico. But no one really knew. What remained was the silence he left behind. At first, the circle hesitated. Without Zeke, the sessions felt unanchored. Some students stopped coming. Others waited, hoping he'd return. Leah didn't wait. She stepped into the center one afternoon, her voice quiet at first, then strong. She didn't try to replace him. No one could. But she carried his questions forward. She offered space for others to speak, to challenge, to feel. Bit by bit, the circle began to move again. Then one morning, weeks later, a manila envelope arrived at Leah's off-campus apartment. No return address. Inside were a series of pages, handwritten in Zeke's unmistakable scrawl. A title across the first sheet, Dust Doesn't Forget. It wasn't an essay. It was a collection, reflections, parables, fragments of thought. Some were poetic. Others were sharp with critique. Together they felt like a farewell, but not an ending. At the bottom of the last page, a note. Legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about what you leave behind for others to carry. The dust I swept from these halls holds more truth than the plaques on their walls. Keep building the circle. Z. Leah cried when she read it. Later that week, she stood at the center of the lawn again, holding the pages in her hands. Around her, the circle waited. I want to read something, she said. And she did. Page by page, voice steady. The circle grew quiet. A few students recorded. Others simply listened, letting Zeke's words move through them like wind through canyon stone. When she finished, no one clapped. That wasn't what this space was for. Instead, someone stood up and placed a small book of their own on the grass. Then another. Then another. The circle had become something more. A living archive. A movement. Across campus, something shifted. Professors began referencing Zeke's work in syllabi. Students started using the lawn circle as a case study in their theses. A visiting artist painted a mural on the humanities building wall, an abstract portrait of a man with a broom in one hand and constellations in the other. They never named him. Zeke wouldn't have wanted that. He was never chasing recognition. Only truth. Only freedom. In the years that followed, students came and went. Administrators changed. Buildings rose and fell. But the circle remained. And in the quiet rustle of the leaves, whenever the wind caught just right, those who listened closely swore they could still hear his voice. Asking questions. Planting seeds. Sweeping dust. Here are 7 moral lessons that can be drawn from the forgotten genius. 1. Never judge a person by their position or appearance. Zeke was mocked, overlooked, and dismissed because he wore janitor's clothes and pushed a mop instead of wielding a title. Students and professors alike made assumptions about his intelligence and worth based solely on the surface. But beneath that uniform was a brilliant mind. An author, a former professor, a philosopher whose thoughts were years ahead of their time. This teaches us that true value is not tied to profession, clothing, or status. Society often assigns worth through shallow lenses, but human dignity runs deeper. The most unassuming person may carry a universe of wisdom. Humility, not hierarchy, is where real power lives. This story challenges us to see the people we pass by every day, custodians, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, not just as service providers but as whole people full of dreams, stories, and knowledge. 2. Intellectual power is not confined to institutions. Zeke chose to walk away from the academy, not because he lacked the intellect to remain, but because he could no longer breathe within its rigid expectations. His deepest thoughts flourished not in lecture halls but on the grass under the Arizona sun. There, in the open air, he taught more profoundly than any structured course ever could. This lesson reminds us that wisdom is not the exclusive property of universities, diplomas, or degrees. True knowledge exists beyond gates, books, or chalkboards. It is cultivated in lived experience, critical thought, and unfiltered truth. By removing the institutional filter, Zeke invited students to think without fear. In doing so, he proved that intellectual liberation begins when we step outside the walls we've been told to trust. 3. The most powerful teaching comes through listening and vulnerability. Zeke never lectured from a podium. He never asserted authority. Instead, he created a circle, one without a head, where everyone's voice carried equal weight. In that circle, students didn't memorize facts. They wrestled with truth. They didn't perform for grades. They explored what it meant to be human. This teaches us that the best teachers are often the best listeners. And that vulnerability, the courage to say, "I don't know," or "this is what I feel," is the soil where transformation takes root. Zeke's method was a quiet rebellion. He rejected control and chose connection. Through that choice, he taught others how to think freely and feel deeply, something no test can measure. For erasure is a form of violence, but memory is a form of resistance. Zeke's academic contributions were buried, forgotten. His name scrubbed from relevance not because his ideas lacked merit, but because he dared to speak too boldly, too truthfully, in a system that wasn't ready to hear him. But Leah remembered, and her remembering became a spark. This teaches us that to forget is to erase, but to remember, deliberately, defiantly, is to restore. Many brilliant minds throughout history have been lost to systemic erasure, due to race, gender, poverty, or politics. It's a cycle that continues. The story reminds us that we must actively remember the silenced, uplift the hidden, and search out the names history tried to bury. Doing so is not just an act of respect, it's a radical act of justice. 5. Legacy is not about fame, it's about what you leave for others to carry. Zeke wasn't interested in accolades. He didn't return to reclaim his position or demand recognition. He came back to plant seeds, ideas, questions, challenges. He knew his work mattered not because it appeared in textbooks, but because it sparked something living in others. That's the true legacy, not a name etched in stone, but a thought that keeps evolving in someone else's mind. This teaches us that our impact isn't always visible or immediate. Often we won't see the fruits of our work. But if we act with love, with courage, and with truth, what we leave behind will ripple long after we're gone. 6. Freedom comes when you stop asking for permission to be yourself. Zeke walked away from an academic world that required him to shrink, to dilute his ideas, to conform. It cost him a career, yes, but he gained something far more valuable: the freedom to be whole. His story shows that the system isn't always built for the truth teller. And sometimes, survival means refusing to play the game. Freedom is not comfort. It is the power to live in alignment with your values no matter the cost. Zeke's choice wasn't easy, but it was honest. And in the end, it allowed him to teach in the way he was born to teach. Not from power, but from presence. 7. The quietest acts can spark the loudest change. There was no dramatic protest. No media frenzy. Zeke didn't demand justice with a megaphone. He swept floors. He listened. He asked questions. And in doing so, he lit a fire in Leah and through her in others. This final lesson is that revolution often begins not with noise, but with listening. Not with protest signs, but with conversation. Zeke didn't try to be a hero. He simply stayed true. And in a world obsessed with visibility, that quiet kind of integrity is its own form of power. Conclusion. The Forgotten Genius is not just a story about one man's hidden brilliance. It's a story about the systems that forget and the souls who remember. It's about the circles we build, of truth, of thought, of love, and how those circles outlive classrooms, institutions, and even names. It reminds us that education is not a degree, it is a lifelong act of seeing, feeling, and challenging the world around us. And that the most powerful lessons often come from the places we least expect. Thank you for watching and listening to The Forgotten Genius. We hope this story touched your heart, challenged your perspective, and reminded you of the power of unseen voices. If you found meaning in this journey, if it made you pause, reflect, or feel something deeply, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't stop here. We have more stories designed to inspire, uplift, and open the mind. So when you're ready, check out the other videos on this channel, each one crafted to leave a lasting impact. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and tell us what part of the story resonated most with you. Until next time, keep listening, keep learning, and never forget, the most extraordinary truths are often hidden in the most ordinary places.